There is the domestic rate, which is $6 per annum, and the commercial rates too.
Rote te 1964, mga tauianga tayo no te mea rote te turi takere, ko te Resident Commissioner ko e te tangata mata i teme ko mono i te Queen's Representative.
And in 1964,
Tauia ko e amendment ko e tei tau ture, no rungo ki te water rates, wa te tuatau te paparapati, chipu i te riri.
and you will notice in 1972 there was further amendment to the Cook Islands Act, the repealing of the domestic water rate.
Te mea rao ke kari taui i a koe o ki te wai tanganga e te kimpopong. Ma ni rā te te wai ne e kare ko tai i te taki i ane i te rā putanga te kimpopong.
But let me remind you that the commercial water rate has never been repealed. It remained ever since then, but no one has been paying for this.
Nā aga tātou rea no e mata tātou wai ki tātou te ngā rāna e ua. Te takono o ngā te wai a te tua orongo e me tako mai ngā te enu.
So let us look at how we have established Tatou Vai, and we will see how we get our water.
Nā te me mua ko tā koe runga rea e wai ua.
You will see from the PowerPoint that our water here is from rainwater.
Te ngā matai ki te paku muri, kua tauturu te kaumani te isi tangata e rua tausin tanga wai plastic on tausin rita.
And you may recall a couple of years ago, the government had been supporting our people here in Rarotonga by providing about 2,000 water tanks to help us.
Nā te tai wai rea tā tātou e use, e tanga nei te te, mko i karanga i rea e surface water, e prakoto te tai rea te underground water.
There are three main ways of us getting water. Firstly, rainwater. Secondly, surface water. And third, underwater ground.
O marama tātou e te turanga wai, ui te tātou ngai maunga, paura te wai e tampu wai ki runga, ka te mai rātou, tapaka mai rātou ki rātou te kawai.
And we will notice that the water that we receive runs from the hills down through the valleys and through the streams.
Nā tera wai rātou te kawai, koe te rea te wai e tutu ai anu karanga e free the wai. O te rātou wai free.
And this is the water that we are all claiming. It's free water that runs along the surface into the stream.
Ki tātou rea paura te anga i te rea te tāna me i maani, i koi te wai no tātou, i awana, awatiu, ta wai ne, Papua, Matawera, ngā toe, taipara, tupapa, totoko i tu, muria wai, rutaki e turang.
So you will notice from all these valleys, we have catchments, and there are 12 of them around Rarotonga.
Te manamana tā rao ke o tiriro wai, me tame te tuatou ua, me te tātou ki te nei, ka te tiriro. Te tutu, no ronga te awana ato tātou mea, wai numero ta iro tiriro.
So you will see when we have wet seasons, there is an overflow of water. But when there,
me tame rā te maro, ko te tātou ki te rea ka rea wai, te me te rai rero wakamata tātou rea te kope kope.
when there is a drought, we don't see the water overflowing, and that's when we start talking about it.
Okay. Nā runga ki rea te tai rawanga te kaumani i te kimi mai, te tai wai no tātou, ko i uke karangai e te papaia te underground infiltration gallery.
There is another form of gathering water for us, and that's the underground infiltration galleries.
Nā i kone e a rātou i mānie i awana takuaine awatiu Papua.
And there are 4 galleries that we have here in Rarotonga, Awana, Takuaine, Awatiu, Papua.
Me te tā rātou mānianga te me semena rako te katau, tuku rātou i raro te wāru, raro ke te enua.
So this is the system they use to capture water from underground.
Nā, I ti te mene e rira, akara tātou e rira te tanga o ato tātou kaumani I rawe I takamita ki tātou wai.
So we will now look at the things that the government have implemented to provide us with water.
Nā karakoto koni, te akonono e koni, paurua tāna ngai rawe no te kare e rawa te muni, te māngai roko mai tire mata I te budget, Mā tātou te rama me te stage 1, stage 2. Aki toko toi e mata I te āra mareanga te eponga te me are rawanta tātou muni.
So you will notice that there are different stages of development that the government went through in building our water system, because we did not have enough money, so the government provided enough money to build each stage as we go.
So kita kotore mata iti ochi mai da tuanga I runga te upgrade anga te kamita ke anga te karanga ia te submain mono ia te paipa auri ki te paipa PVC.
And you will also notice that it came to a point where the government was able to replace all the old pipes and installing with the new ones.
Na te mai tātou re tera e toru I raro, ko I rea te me tera e akamata e te Tatou Vai project.
And it was during stage 12, the 3 stages, that's when Te Tatou Vai started.
Na te tātou nere, o te tātou re ki te turang.
Now we are in that stage.
I te koto te runga tā koe I akano mai ki runga, te au to consumers.
You will see, according to the PowerPoint, that the top part refers to the consumers.
Okay, te rira te mea ti teme ta tātou te rai e tanga nei ti teme. Marira, ochi te rai raro ne, paura te ra stage, ochi e ko papa.
On that PowerPoint, the TMV Stage 2, we are discussing about the consumers part, and the new part at the bottom, they are completed.
Marira, e tamanmantanga te, kai re tātou e roko tanga tiri no te runga patu te etni.
But there are some issues, disputes, and we are not going to proceed with it.
Nā, runga te wai I te teme nei, ere te wai kia.
Now we will look at the allocation or the distribution of water.
Nā, ko awana, ko iau ke tera karamurumura.
For the red allocated area, it's the areas being covered by Avana.
Nā kai ki tātou mi ngātangia e titi kāwaka e arora nei e tātou I koni, te wai e tātou e inu nei no hawana mai.
So you will see the main pipeline from Ngatangia covers whole of Ngatangia and the beach side along Titi Kaiwaka right here to Puekura.
Nā kai tātou re te matie, turangi tiri.
The green sketch area, it's the water from Turangi.
Ara mai nā tātai, nā tuatai I matawera, tupapa, ara mai ke uro topanga e koe te radar.
It covers the whole area around Turangi, down through Matavera, Tupapa, and down to Nikau.
Nā te watiuri ko tera rengaranga e ara mai e ki tai.
And the Avatiu Valley covers the area that is shown in yellow.
So akamutu e ri ki ko I Black Rock, ko iu ki tanga I akamutu e tō Havana.
And that ends at Black Rock, where the other area where the water from Havana finishes.
So nika me tātou iri tō takuai ne, mi ko mai e te kauai I awatiu, ere e ki te matara I te tua matawera te ngai tūporo tūpapa. Tāna tuanga te rai anga e.
So the other side of Takuene, it covers for the light pepple,
So
area that covers up to Matavera.
Amere te me ware au ria nā te pūpaipa o matawera e tūpapa e anga I tiri patong. Ngare o purple.
And the pepple covers the Matavera and Tupapa area.
Anyway, te mea ui kai rira, o auta te re, tātou kone uta, te wai no rira mai, no ngātoe, rūtaki, e Papua.
And the area that covers the light blue area is the water from Papua and Rutaki.
Brian Mason, Chair, TTV. Tatou Vai Limited was established as a limited liability company owned by the Cook Islands Investment Corporation when it became clear that there would need to be a company established that would take over the management of the Tatou Vai project upon its completion.
Ko tō Tatou Vai, kua katina mau I te rera no te tai tātou poto ua, a kamata mai e tara runga urumari ma o okute, Roa tawasini e tainga o rumaitu I raro ake I te tamaru a te Cook Island Investment Corporation.
There has been a bit of confusion due to the similarity of names, but the Tatou Vai project is PMU, GHD and McConnell Dow. They are the people responsible for the construction of the network.
E te wai nei te ta o tuangatai I roto I te o ingoa a paina ia nei, tō Tatou Vai e pera katoa te matawai, ko te matawai nā rātou I akatina mō I te o ngai kakapu anga vai I raro ake I te anga a te McDowell.
Our involvement with the intakes in particular begins on the commissioning of the network and not before. On the commissioning, on the completion of the project.
Ho tō mātou piri anga I rere ki roto I te ia, te o te anga te o anga e rere mātou e akamatai tā mātou tua.
Excuse me, Brian. Can you just speak in a little bit more English language rather than legal language?
Oh, yes, sir.
I think people are struggling to understand from the speaker, a little bit slower, so that it's easier to hear you.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies to the audience. The intention through this bill is to convert this existing organisation into a statutory corporation like Te Aponga Ports Authority, Airport Authority and Bangkok Islands. So
Ko te tumu I anga I ai te putuputuanga tō Tatou Vai kia katina mō I rātou I raro ake I te kopa pature kia ai te rātou me te Aponga Uira me te Bank o Tanga o te Cook Island Airport Authority e Parauto Port Authority.
so that it is properly accountable to the public, just like those other organisations.
Me anga I rātou me te tū e tika anga I rera tō rātou ki report mai ki tātou te kaumani e Parauto te iti tangata e ate o anga tā rātou I rau.
Walter Tatou White, Tatou Vai. Ka uri au ki te rau papa āti tuatau, ki kore tātou tāke konei tai I te uri tako reo haitutaki. Tatou Vai bill purpose to operate, manage and maintain a reliable public water supply system.
Ko te anganga a tō Tatou Vai kia rave ki anganga ki aka aere ki rave tamo ua turai I te oronga mai I te tai vai ka irina ki ia e karau koe I te oronga mai.
To be self-funding and not make a profit.
Nāna rai te anamuni e kime mai, nā rā kare e anono ia kia maatatu ta anamuni, kia popinga ia ai.
To recognise the importance of landowners in the catchment areas.
Te tai ngā ia kui ngāru poina, ko te ia tuanga ni o te vai, nā te atua te rei oronga mai no tātou katotoa. Te toru I reira, te kite tātou te popinga o te au atu enua, ki runga I te au enua te akatu I te iaonga I kakapu vai.
And be accountable to the Cook Islands Investment Corporation.
E ke rau ka katoa eri te tika angai, kia ripo te rātou, kia kite te rātou ki te Cook Islands Investment Corporation I te wanga tā rātou kārawe.
So Tatou Vai authority establishment and functions.
Ko akatina mō ia te kopapa e tā rātou o ngang kia rawe rātou.
Let's be clear, the areas of operation of Tatou Vai is limited to Rarotonga only, and at some point in the future, Haitutaki will be added by the QR.
Ko te kopapa nei, tō Tatou Vai, ka anga ua te rera ki runga I a Rarotonga nei, e tā teta I au rā ki mua, ka atumu I te rera kei taki.
The functions of Tatou Vai is to collect, treat, and distribute water here in Rarotonga.
E ko te au anga I rera a tō Tatou Vai, kia koi mai, me kore kia ka meitaki I te turanga o te vai, e kia oronga mai I te tai vai ka irina ki ia, e vai meitaki te rera, e nārto kotoa I te tai au tutakia.
To meet and prescribed water standards.
E ka anono kotoa I tō Tatou Vai, ki oronga mai te tai vai e turanga ngā te te tono.
To manage our water resources and also to find new sources for the future as we require it for our demand on the island.
Kia ka tere I te au tānganga o te vai, e tarunga o te rera, I te kimi atuanga I te tai au vai o me karauko mai rā I te tai.
Kia ora ana. My name is Greg Longman and I'm the CEO of TMV TV or to Tatou Vai. I'm going to talk about where the service will be to provide water.
Greg Longman to Ringo, o te anata ko anga, I roto I te ateanga ka tuatu ki tātou I te au ngā I e karauka I mātou I te oronga atu I te wai.
Under Section 5, there's a definition of the full service zone, and the chart
Ke I te irawa rima, kua ka taka mai roto I reira, e ka anono I mātou ki oronga atu I te tai wai.
and the chart on the slide at the moment shows the island of Rarotonga, and the blue line represents 30 meters elevation above the datum, which is defined as the high water mark, mean high water mark, which is basically the sea level.
Ke ki te ara koto I reira I te akatakaanga o te mapu o Rarotonga nei, nā o I te tātai, e te akairo hauika, blue. Kua kairo I te reira, ko te te ia o te ngā I ki roto I te inua, e karauka I mātou te oronga atu I te vai ki kotou, kua ki te ia e torunga uru mita I te are mei tātai mai.
The service zone will be below the blue line at 30 meters elevation, and it encompasses a majority of the dwellings in Rarotonga.
Ko te akairo reira I raro nei I te akairo anga hauika, ko te au ngā I te tātātou ka pāpu e ka tai atu te vai kia kotou.
And it was designed or selected as being a point or elevation where a good service pressure will be able to be achieved at those dwellings.
Ko te reira te akamaramanga, ko te au ngutu are nei I raro nei muria ki I te akairo anga hauika, ko te au ngutu are te ka tai mite ki atu te vai kia kotou e ka riri nui rai te reira.
Kia ora tātou katoto.
Greetings.
Te tuanga nunga te pire nunga tātou catchment ja. Ka ki tātou te pire tutone te runga te catchment boundary. Kia marama tātou te tuanga ngai e tai nei tātou te manakone te pai ko te land boundary. I nara te rote te runga ratonga rote te Matawai project e taingouro I pūpaipa I aka o ia. A mera katoa e taingouro I catchment boundary.
You will see, according to this plan, there are areas that was identified, 10 of them, where catchment has been built.
E sa ka marama te tātou e aka pē te aka no ianga te catchment boundary ia. Tā tātou aka marama mo no ngā toi, ko te I pupepa e angai nei toi uta, me te aka marama ia, I roto ia koe pue koro.
And there is the catchment for Ngatoe. It covers, the water comes for Poekura.
Te aka nono ang katoa tō te, tā tātou ki te ne, ko auto te ngā toi aru mai runga I te kena inua, Edinburgh mai ki tai.
And you will notice it comes from the top and runs down.
A ki te tātou ria te ngai I akaria I maka ia ko tā tōngo auta, ko tīria te catchment boundary. Ka re include mai te ngai eramene ki raro.
So the catchment area is restricted only to the top. It doesn't cover the bottom.
Ke marama tātou ria te ngai tiko tinga I raro te akamataanga o te boundary I raro nei, arato para ki runga I take maunga, ko tīria te catchment boundary e tuto nei madoro te pira.
So you will notice that there is a line at the bottom. It's from that line that goes further up. That's the area of the catchment that we're referring to.
Te ria te akaranga I te catchment boundary. I araro nei te me kakita do tera ngai I roto pūtika I a ngatoe, ko tīria te ngai akatui e te pūpepe e te ame o e akatui nei.
So in the enlargement of this map, you will notice that the catchment is built somewhere in the middle.
A ki tātou ria, te kanonoanga I te catchment boundary, kari I aru o I me tamana ko nā mātou e ākatana pa nā ko, ere ka pra kirung.
So when you look at this, at the sketch of this plan, it's not just a matter for us to determine this is how we're going to do it.
Te kanoa mātou i te catchment boundary raro nei, kua tamata mātou i te akaneke i te boundary kia watata te kiuta, kia roka i tātou te mātango te inua i raro nei, kia roka rei te atu inua, te tangata i te tānganga i te reo.
So when we establish the bottom line of the catchment area, we try to push it further up so that the landowners will still have the use of their land.
Te koronga mātari te kanoa i te line i raro nei, te catchment boundary koioki. A ki te tātou rungo i te tuai i ruto i te o, i ruto i te maunga, ko te ngai kotinga te me eke me ua mai, me eke me te wai nā rungo i take maunga ki raro, ka ere pōro mai te wai ki roto tiki te ngai o te intake.
And therefore, in putting this boundary at the bottom of this sketch map, you will discover that it is in the middle of the catchment of the hills that runs down.
Te koronga mātou kone, nā tiria e aka pāpū mai e aka pētika te aka noonga i te kena. Te kena koe te catchment boundary, kia rauka e pōrua te wai ka eke mai naru mai takamonga ki raro, ka ere mai te rere kuru te tera pupe ko te ngai tā mātou e ākara nei, kia pāruru i a ruru te catchment boundary.
So we established the bottom part of this catchment because that's where the water comes together and that's where we will establish this catchment.
I te aka mana, aka pāpū i te koe ko tanga mātou i te kandau te contour, te erango te maunga. Aru ki te maunga e ere meni ki raro e te iwa tupatia tika mai ki raro. Te pai maunga ere tātou puipuipa manga paere, tā paere. I nāra te whai me ua mai ka eke mai rea nāra te mai te intake. The key thing is kone te intake. Pōrua te o whai ka eke mai nāra ngai te take maunga. Tā mātou tera ngai kotinga tera i akanoa mātou te boundary as further as we can ki uta. Ki loka i tātou. Nō te mea, pōrua tātou anganga ka rawa tātou ki uta, anganga tonu. E rawa nei te pai pupepo ko hamataka e tanu ana te tātou istanga te uta. Pōrua tātou anganga ka rawa tātou ki uta, it will affect what we do up there, make it make it vai roto i te intake.
Brian Mason, Chair of Tatou Vai. For those who have the bill, they will notice that the boundaries of the catchments and the valleys can be altered by regulation under Section 66A and B.
Mea kara koutou I roto I te waka noanga no te au kotinga o te au ngai kakapu wai, te rarua ki te tere anga o te irawaonu o rumaono o te ture tamana.
That is to rectify any mistakes, but some landowners have expressed concern that section could be used to cut out landowners who shouldn't be cut out.
Waka tina mo I te no te akataka anga kare no te tai manako ue ka rauku e te tai tangata I te taui, waka tina mo I rā te rera, e roto I tā mātua akaranga ki te rai mātou I te tika anga o te au inua, atu inua kirunga I tō rātou inua.
So that will be changed.
Eu tāmana manatanga te tai kirunga I te irawa nei, te tai pai kara rātou I maraka I te rera, kai nā roto te ki te atu e karauka I te akatuke I te rera.
In most countries, the government owns the land where the water is collected from, called the catchment.
I roto I te mātanga o te au Basileia, ko te au inua e te kakapune I te vai no te komani tere, no te korona tere.
In the Cook Islands, the government owns none of the land the water is taken from. It's all owned privately.
I te kuke are nei, kare no te korona tere ra tuanga inua no te au atu inua tātakita.
The government has asked the private landowners if they would make a sacrifice for the good of the residents of Rarotonga.
Kua pati tā tātou kawa mani ki te au atu inua tātakitai, ia aka ātinga mai I tō rātou inua kia tānganga I te rera no te kakapuanga I te au kakapu wai.
So that no development occurs which might damage the water supply.
E ko te irinika I ngā reira e, karaupa I te pāruru I te iaunga e nei ki kore e tākino I te vai.
Landowners so far have said, yes, but we will control it.
Ko tōtua mai te au atu inua e ka ariki rātou I te rera, nara ko te tikanga aka tere I te rera kia mātou rai.
Part 3 of the Act deals with the establishment of catchment committees.
Ko te tuanga toru o te ture, ko iau i te akatina mō anga i te au komiti,
And the landowners of each title in a catchment
e ko te au atu e noa e tika anga tō rātou ki te iaunga e kakapu ai,
will elect one person to represent them,
e tai mata, e tutua no rātou,
and they will be all the landowners' representatives in a catchment will make up the catchment committee.
e ko te au mata meroto mai i te iau kakapu ai nei, ko rātou te ka ho ki roto i te ia kopapa o te au komiti o te kakapu ai.
Any person who wants to do anything which may affect the quality and the quantity of the water in the catchment must get the approval of the catchment committee.
Ko te tai wātu tangata te ka rawe i te tai tū anga ki roto i te iaunga e nei, me kore aka tuke i te tūranga o te vai, ka nonu i a rātou ki arawi atu i te au komiti o te kakapu ai.
And that includes Tatou Vai.
Ua o katoa atu i te kopapa nei tō tātou wai.
If Tatou Vai wishes to put anything on the land in the catchment,
Mei te mea ka rawe te tō tātou wai i te tai au apinga ka katū i roto i te anga o te kakapu wai,
it must seek approval and pay compensation.
ka nonu i a rātou ki tiki i te akatika anga a te kopu tangata e ma te tutaki atu i te tai tutaki anga mun.
Yeah, I think if the chairman's happy at this stage, we pause.
Tēnā rea. Tēnā rea ka marama angi ki a tātou i te tai tuanga o te apira nei, no runga i te aka tupuanga i te kopapa nei ko tō tātou wai, i te aka taui anga mi te aka mana anga o te company raroa ki the Companies Act, te aka taui nei tōna tūranga ki aitere mi tō tātou te aponga, the Ports Authority, the Airport Authority, as a statutory authority. Nā ko tūtua mai, no runga i te tuanga nei o tō tātou inua. Ko te inua te tūtua i nei, ko te inua te iutaki i tō tātou pūpai patikai. Ko te o te ngai te kapu i nei te wai, te kā tea mai, nā rato i te o peka ki tea mai ki rato i te kauai, tea mai rere ki rato i tō tātou pūpai. Tēnā te aka marama angi a tātou kātoto, me e toko tō tuatau te, me kai nangaro koto i te tuku mai te tai manako, me kāre te tai uianga aka marama. Please, tāki mai te orima, e tiria ka ato o tō te tai microphone kia komokomo mai. Yes, please, you can use that microphone here. Ana mai koe ki mua nei, tuku mai koe te oingoa. Yeah, I think this one's closer.
Kia ora ana, tōku ingo kono oro tu oro. I'm from Ararangi and also have interest in the land in Rutaki, especially in Ngātoe. E wianga o tāku. You were saying, Brian, and sorry, I forgot the name, that about the boundaries of the catchment. Okay, Ngātoe is an uninvestigated land, and we have interest below that that catchment. So what are your intentions of this land with no landowners? That's question number one. So how have you planned to form a committee for this land that has no landowners?
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. The bill provides that the CEO is what might be called the placeholder, but the minister can appoint somebody. A number of landowners have said they're not happy with that.
Just a minute. Ko te aka marama, Ko te au enua kari I kimi I ake, ka iki ia te CEO e koia te kumiti I runga I te rau enua e ka anono katoa ia te akatikaanga a te minita no runga I te re.
The difficulty is it needs to be clearly defined in the Act. It can't be an uncertain group of people, because that's the problem we've got with Article 66A of the Constitution, where there's no definition of aronga mana.
Ko te iki anga ki runga I te ia, nā te minita e tuku I te reira, nara e u tāmanamanta anga tētai ki runga I te irawa ture, e ke tau katoa ki te irawa o te tātātu ture tāti kuke are.
So what we need is a named person. It could be President of the House of Ariki.
Hang on, Brian.
Sorry?
I think the question is quite simple. It's
Well, how do you get the
what was the land uninvestigated?
Yeah.
So how is the customary landowners going to appoint someone on land that is uninvestigated
Well, the problem
for the catchment committee?
The difficulty is that if everyone recognises who the customary landowners are, that's fine. But if there's any disagreement, because there's no register of titles, you need to have somebody who you trust can make a decision. So I don't really mind who that is, but you really need this person on reasonable belief. Says that's the person. These are the people that should nominate the person. That's the difficulty, because with customary land, unless everyone recognises who the landowners are, you can't work out who they are.
Yeah, well, the problem is that is going to cause a problem, because as you well know, that uninvestigated land, the people that live underneath it, they are the ones that are entitled to go on that land. At the moment, there are quite a lot of blocks of land surrounding that area. And I have been up there to have a look at where this Ngātoe catchment goes up. And you talk about boundaries. And I think that boundary that you have up there is not exactly where you are pointing at, because you've already started the work from way down near the flat area. And that affects the landowners that are on that block of land before you even get up to the catchment. And I don't think that there has been much involvement with that land ngātoe, especially when it's uninvestigated. I have strong interest in there because we're right below it. There's a lot of families that own land underneath there. So I have a problem with that. If you're going to say a CEO is going to be appointed, then maybe you, Brian, I would ask that if you could help us with this, that all the land that's around that catchment should be asked to get together, maybe with you, all the people around that area.
That's a very good
And
idea.
you're the only one that I can trust to do it. So you talk about trust, and I trust you to do it.
That's a very good idea.
Okay? So that's the only problem I have with this
Yeah.
for now.
No, that is.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, the map that was shown, the boundary of the catchment area, doesn't follow a land boundary. It follows the ridge of the mountain. Ridge of the mountain, where the water falls, it will fall down this side. It falls on the other side of the ridge, catchment K. So that's the difference there. But thank you very much. Not that our suggestion, I think, very sensible one. Yes, Derek.
Okay. Kia ora, Deputy Prime Minister, and Ministers present, and everyone here, and the team over here. Thank you. Okay, my name is Derek Stanley Piru. I am a landowner at the Takoine catchment. My father, Oliver Piru, is a landowner at the Avana catchment. I think it is sensible to charge for water. I haven't finished yet. But it is a sensible choice to do. I asked, because on page 13, number 31, section 1, that you use a family of 5 with 3 children as a guideline of how to, on consumption, on an average consumption. And a good idea would be to talk with our outer islands, because water is precious, and they would know how precious water is. Okay, number 2, I've listed a couple of things. We already have in place, this is for our growers, we already have in place the old system. It's going around the island. Growers don't need clean water, they don't need chemicals in the water. Why not use the old system to feed our growers for free? Most of our water goes out to the sea if it's not caught and put into the current new system. Okay, number 3 is regarding hotels and businesses. Okay, I suggest that we charge, that's where our water is being consumed. A population of Rarotonga is only 8,000 to 9,000 residents. We have over 100,000 guests, usually. If we want tourism to grow, we need infrastructure to match. We shouldn't be charging us local people, but we should be charging the ones that are making money. I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Derek. We haven't moved to the part 4 yet, which is operations, but which coming up next. But yes, please.
Thank you, the Minister. To delegation, kuto yarmai, takato ngang mania, takato pemeni mitakino te istang. Before the nganga kakatupu gua takapinian de ino de not the inspection, not the pachianga de chikanga de au landowner, no torato ngai no te wai. Maybe about to Baba. Well, there was a delegation that went around the island, and they were asking for the permission for where the water intakes are to be, if the landowners can agree with that. And maybe Sam can remember this. You remember in 1913, your Ariki Miriana was kicked out by us. So he's been on our land. 3 of my lands. I am Pera Tutara, Tinamonteo from Marangi. Pera Tutara Monteo. So Miriana was kicked out from one, so we take the power for that, all those lands. I'm glad that you, the government, are dealing this easily and giving us a chance to talk. And one of those, I speak that night, and one of the things I said was that sure, the water is from God. It comes through the property. Since 1907, there has been charges of the water. I'm 76, and I remember that very well, because we never paid our water bills. Please, Minister, you will never be successful. We will never pay our bills. Okay, I'll add on that. I own a house in New Zealand for 35 years in Auckland, right in the center. And the water there is treated. And at times there were people staying in my house. And you know what happened? They don't pay the water bills. Now there's a new rule in Auckland that all the owners of the property have to take I'm old, I'm going to go pay the bill. Well, if you're going to make a bill here, all the children will not pay and end up me paying it. So please think carefully what you're doing.
Thank you, Papa Tati.
I don't know one more. For the man who's saying, oh, giving us good water, and we're going to have to pay for this. Mark, this is what they call filter. And I filter your water coming into my property for 4 years over here. I cleaned this thing. I just cleaned it the other day, only 2 days ago. Look, it's full of mud. Are you going to charge this water to me to drink? How is this mix? How are we going to call this a Coca-Cola mixed thing? Look, I cannot see you in that pipeline. You're going to give me a clean water. You know why? This is a residual from the mud, from the water of the rainy day. And they are sitting in those pipes. Can the expert tell me how many kilo of mud are in one pipe? And you surround Raro, it could be 25 to 30 tons of mud inside the pipe. And you're going to mix your chemical, you're going to end up like this every day. You can't charge me this. Look. Clean water first before we talk the money. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Papa Tabi. Thank you, Papa Tabi. I did it to Tamana. I did it to Tamana. Could take the Koranga, Tattoo in order to get Chachi to Tattoo along the way. No, they don't get to the Pyrenees, but to Guna that it's away free. On the Kato to Ardatu at the Mato the way. He took it to me, white on the Canada Namo, Pita Papa Tapi Kalamai. It'll take a couple of years. You get the meeting Tato, educate the white to the way the Tangang in a to Tato to a Karoko really Tato, they are annoyed to take Chong away. Irava, Itiong to a Raveta Lato Angang. Make a Kaimo Mora go it away, go tell it at the Tame, Capira, you go it away. Yadomana go tell it about Tapi for Makwa. No one than a filter that we are carrying my quite Tanuarta. Karuki upping a Tamu Yak. The Tatou Yakatu. Tatou Vai, the Tuato, the airman name, Mirotomai, the Kawai, the Togo to Mutuari. I refuse to eat, or you get away, Vadi, the Tuato Hua, at that way it in me. Kitanga or Tato Yaka Yakamata Tato Yanga, Tiao Ping Tatou Yakatu, Ejiria, Kirauka Tato, Mita Aure to my the Tama, iti Vadi, the Repo to Tato Pipe, Tia Mene, Karaukari Tato, the way Ma. I the time I get to Tatou Mutuari. So, me cario Tatou Huyanga K, Norway to Tatou Catchment Committee the Inwa. Please, Kia Katia to Tiri, Makatato Kaneke Girunga the next stage of the Pirene Goyogi, Norunga the Tutakian, the tariff. Okay, go Tani, there are made a Torin.
Kirana Tato Katoto, there are Mato de Kotoimo, Mato Murine, Uteo, Tani Mataro. We hang over Taku Norunga, the Tanta de Karanga, 30 meters. We do it at Okare in Noto, Itane. The Gumeni to Tattoo is not. I think I toy, I never good monga. Then I toy mere Chirunga Gedra 30 meters. In the Karanga, the Kamatanga, the Pira, obligation of the TTV, the appointment of Mataway, Kimoto, Irunga Inua. Me the Macanariate in way, Chirunga the 50 meters. Kakapiri go to the Takanong, Cardinal Numere Makotawi.
I would like to ask a question in relation to this 30-meter zone. As we all know that a lot of our land on the strait has been used, and so our people are starting to move up to the mountain. And a lot of our people returning from New Zealand wants to build out their houses. So there is the movement of people to build their houses above the 30-meter mark. So my question is, can Tatou Vai supply us if you're above this?
Thank you, Nodanawi, and Teni, the Kitinati, Mapune, Irotoite, the Pira, Wakano, Yeteangai. Iraroki the line a week and Nekotenga, iti a ted way. Kitugitato to Tatou Vai, a gravity system. Kare Pamu, Kare Eping a power, a operative way. Gravity system, not mere a system Mama, Gite, Gartatu, a Tutaki. Kote the Titi, the Gateti away, Megakatuko to Are Irungaki, iti a Titi. I narrow it is a pamugi te, the way you take to Are, Megare, the Tanka, Erokaya with the Caputua, me umai, it was water. Te Raving a Caratato, it Mutuare, te waronga te ka tū tō rātou are ki utai te maunga. Kai nāro i ki prāni mei te ki rātou mea ka tū koe ki utai te maunga, ki marama koe kare te wai te ki utai te maunga, ki utai te teite o te maunga. Kai nāro i ria, te tai tauturu, te tai pāmu, me kare te tai tanka wai, te wai atura te o kimpo pinga, tā tātou karawe tātou. But ke marama tātou te wai free, o tō tātou wai, te rātou na waitu, te kātea.
Ai, no te nā mana tāu ki ria, pēne ki akara i rea te aronga e ora ki runga i ria, i te tai manga tauturu, pēne ke tāke mai tā rātou allocation ki runga, me kore ki mai te tai rawanga i te balance i tā rātou ka tutaki, e te ronga i raro nei, mako o tō rātou pressure, te rua toko mana. Akara mai tātou te presentation i mua kena te akita me angai nā te wariki pōrua i akamata te anga. E te akatika i te wai, ki a tukuna e ki te iti tangata, e ki a tchāti ia. Ia koe akara atura i tera set up, e akapapu tiri ki a koe, paurua te enua no te uiariki. Paurua te enua no te uiariki. Er mea au ki ria i muri mai, te taru mea ngā te papa a kirato. Karanga i ria, uninvestigated land. Mana tā ria tātou ria te karanga e, kare e atu enua e runga tera enua. E mana koto, pēne ke, me tēr ki tera turanga o tera enua, uninvestigated land, e tātou e mangarupoina, e atu enua to teranga. Pēne ke, karuke nā te arike, iki mai te mata i te tūkira te tera komiti. Me kore te tai aronga taonga, nā rātou e iki mai te mata, harire tātou e taro ake. Me ka karuke tātou nā te au atu e noe oke mai, te ia rea tātou e mana tā nei i roto i tāre akawā. O te emana ko otra, a karakara mai tātou nā tiri rapa akamatara mai ea tātou. Mā tā ua atura e tāko ueang, tera ua tāko e rono ti te, kia rana.
We'll now move on to the issue that's been raised by Tapi, which is water charges.
Sorry, you have one more question from Doreen. Yeah.
Sorry.
Kia ora, my name is Doreen Boggs. I represent, there are landowners that I represent that have interests. Kino e i tako ine e pera katoa I take tumu. Pera katoa tukumitua waine. I roto nei te ipanga ki a e. Te mea mua, nurunga I tātou presentation I te e tukumana ko I tātou I mua nei runga I tiki ngākai akarea koto I tātou I punga tukumere ki runga I tātou awata tutu, e kari mera, me te mai ki tiri e tuanga, aka blow up mai koto ki te katotoa. Koto oi mua kone nanga e te ki te tona. Me akaratu ti arunga I muri kone tianga e kari ki te tona. Please, ko te rā te tai, akara mai koto I tiri e tuanga. E pera, no runga I tā koto I paanga I rawe koto I napo I awarua. I'm sure there were some karipiti ora e tātou I tie po. E te tai o tumana ko ti tukuna I atu ki tātou ki koto. I'm sure in Napo, itakoto ipanga in Napo ki te otonga. And I'm sure we don't want to keep repeating the same thing. E pati anga te, me kātika I koto, akari mai koto, e a te tai, aka tuke anga a koto I rauka mai, noro tu I tiri e uipanga I Napo, ti tukuna I atu, ti tamana ko I atu I Napo. E mana ko o te orunga atu nei ki tātou, ki kore tātou e repeat ora. I'm sure there was a lot of good points that was put out on the table last night, and I'm sure there was a lot of response from you guys last night. Ki kore tātou e repeat ora e tātou ipanga e erani tātou. Ko e tutu atu neo, te akara neo nurunga I te irawa, ono oru maono e tutu ara e nurunga I the boundary. E tā iku I ara nurunga I the boundary. Kare we arikiana, e nā koto me kore nā the minister or whoever is in charge of making that decision, I
am referring to section 66 for the boundaries. I don't believe that the minister should be responsible in defining it.
Or whoever is set to to make that decision. I believe that it should come back to the landowners. And if you did say that it can be changed, I don't want to hear it can be changed. I want to hear, yes, we will change. We will change that. Yeah. Ko tāku e orunga e patia tune ki runga i te ngā kai. Me karoko e koto. Nori au e karanga ne, tā koto tuku anga i napo, e kari mai ne te tātou iti tangata no te otonga, e mane te ako oki mai anga i te, e kataui anga te tai a koto i tuku koto i napo.
I believe that the meeting you had in Avarua, you have made some changes. So can you explain to us what are those changes for us tonight?
Well,
Yes.
pene ba, yeah. Karau ko ia ko te pa ui tirira. O te mea mua norunga i te au ngai, te au tūtua ti tukuna i mai i na pō, i tā tātou uipanga i te auatonga. I think, o te akarauka i te committee, i te ere nā roto i te pira nei, i te akakiti atu i te au ngai, i te tāmanako ia, ka akatau i ia. But, kai nāra rea tātou, ki o ki te tei tuatou ki tō tātou i te tangata i puai kura, i ki te miti ki rātou, tā mātou i akari i te otong, ki kore mātou e kape te tei ngai, o te mei te tei pēkari te ana ki tā tātou i pānga i te otong, ki te pōrua tātou, tia te ka akari i ki tātou. Noronga i te the section 66, no te akataui anga i te boundary tā tātou i kite, ko te akakoroanga o te section nei, no te mea, kairuki tātou i ngangaro ki tena ia mai muri mai ake, o te tai potonga enua, o te tai au atu enua i runga i te potonga enua kari o, ki roto i te kōtinganga, ti tukuna ia i runga i te boundary. E ka inangaro te au atu enua kia mata i rato, i runga i te catchment committee. Ko te ia te tumu, e tukuna ia te section ki roto, e rauka i te tārua ko, i te tai atu enua te kore, i ki tena ia mai, i muri mai ake, ko te ia potonga enua ti roto rea te ia i te catchment. But kariuki i roto i te pira. That's the only reason. So we don't want to miss out any potential landowner on a land in the catchment area that may not have been captured in the boundary. I muri mai ake. It is not to remove any landowner. It is only to add a landowner in. Am I correct there, Brian?
Mr. Chair, you are correct, but the landowners are also correct. It could be used the other way, and that's their concern. So I think that could be addressed by providing that any landowner can apply to be included in the catchment, and that way no one can be taken out.
I think it's the wording inside here, because it doesn't describe that. It doesn't describe so that the landowner is going to be part of it or not part of it. You know, it just said it would, have the right to amend the boundary. Yeah. What boundary are we talking about? Boundary for the right of the landowner to be there, or boundary so that we can build this catchment? So it's up to you guys. If we can reword that, you know, so that we can understand it clearly. Because the way you're explaining to me is, I don't think we're reading it that way. We're interpreting it differently. My second thought is on the, on the landowners, on the catchment committee that you have. You're talking about it. You have a speaker earlier talking about uninvestigated. I quite like the idea. Danny was talking about it, uninvestigated, land. Why don't we elect somebody from the Kōtunui or the House of Hariki? Settle that. We don't have to worry about landowners trying to fight who does that belongs to. And then, for us landowners, if this pipe is running on your land, okay? If this pipe is running on your land, then some of you should be on that committee. I don't believe that it should only be one person, because some of these land, you have 1,000 people, landowners. One person to represent 1,000 of these landowners, I don't believe in that. And I think you should have more than one. I would say 3. I propose 3 landowners on here, you know, from these land. This is just a proposal. Yeah. Te akara ni tātou tika i tangata. Yeah. Noko tu ti au inu ere ka yusi ka tanga anga ia. E tae mai ni te wai nā runga. Ere mai ni te paipa nā runga. Noko tu. Ka inaoro rei koto. Ia e nā te tai o tai o. Akara koto i te tai arunga. Tuka tau i te koto kupu tangata. E mata noko tu. Ko tāku e pai ni ki runga i te kai ngā kai. Te toru. Nō runga i tā tātou e tutaki ni tātou. E papau mai nei koto ki tutaki ia. Tō tātou wai. Te akara ni eo. Ia mātou e kapu vai nei nā mātou rea te tanka. Kare nā koto. E ato koto manako, e ata koto akapapaanga, akanonoanga, no te tiati mai. Te akarongo nei mātou, ka tiati ia rea mātou.
We noticed that in the bill that there is that you have the right to put charges on us to pay for the water that we have in our water tanks. What do you have to cover on that?
Ko te eo ki te te eo ngai, ko tipu I e te kumiti. Kare ti e roto. So me e tanga to o, kapura koe ta au wai, na aurei ta rā wai. So that's it. Wow. That's off.
Thank you no te kamarumon. Trai re, wakarongo tātou kato to, toko tō were e kapune koto, kare koto e tiati ia. Tamo tātou ki rena. Te mea o penga, nōrunga I tā koto vai to anga I te ai te kapou anga vai a te o ngutu are. Ka ki te teo ki koto, ko te tai tangata e train e nāo te vai I runga I te matare a kau ane. I run that water, why? To release the mud that comes down the road onto the main road. And it takes me half an hour to clear that water. And all it comes out is mud for half an hour. I wonder how you guys are going to charge me for that, for trying to clean that water, if you tend to come into that.
We're not charging for the water, we're charging for the fertilizer.
For the... Come by me again, Brian, I didn't hear you.
Fertilizer.
Yeah.
For the fertilizer. It's not funny. Maybe we'll fertilize your water. So, no, these are the kind of things that you guys need to understand. We're the ones that live on this island. We know how these water run in our village. We know how we clean our own water, release the pressure so the mud comes out, so that my neighbors get clean water, including myself. The problem is, I have to let it release that water for half an hour. It would be amazing. What kind of charges are you going to charge us for that, just for cleaning that water? Thank you.
I'll just respond to Doreen.
George, can I respond to Doreen? Ko te wari o ki tā Doreen I tuto mera me ki te akara tātou I te map, te rao ngai o te murumura, I te tātou I arorangi, that's at the end of the water from Havana. It's always the biggest area, me maro na ke ana, ko te ngai, from here, I ruao, always the first to suffer. Ko te tumu, ko te mamao ki te away the tani. So we know that. But with the system, te ka tamau ia, ka remiti ere. Te ki te nei tātou, e tai pūpaipa e ngā e tāna ka āngai ai. Ko te system o tō tātou wai, ka rauka I te o pūpaipa kātou toa I te tuku I tā rātou wai ki te tai au ngā I ua I runga I tō tātou inua. So me maro ana te tai pūpaipa, ka rauka I te tai pūpaipa ke I te āngai I te ngai. So ko te paranianga te tamau ia I tō tātou system o tō tātou wai. But to answer your question, mita papa tapire. Ara tātou I tutaki me e wari te ka te mai roto I tō tātou paipa. Me e mataki te ka te mai a tātou ka tutaki. So yeah, that makes sense, common sense. You won't be charged for anything that comes out like mud. I wouldn't accept it myself. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, just if I may, on Doreen's point about whether one representative is sufficient, that was an issue that was raised in the Sinai Hall. The challenge is that you want to make sure that the landowners are properly represented, so the committee has to be a reasonable size. But the other problem is you don't want it too big so it can't function. So, for example, you have, I think, 8 landowner groups in one area, so you end up with 24. Lindsay Francis and one other person, Nolene Brown, raised that issue last night. So it's something we're looking at to get the right balance to ensure that everyone's properly represented.
Thank you, George.
Kia ora na koto I runga I te ki ngā kai, kia ora na tātou, putu mai te apo. Toko ingo, George Taikakara. Atu e nua I runga I Kiru, 107, 109F, Avatiu. In the poll, I raised one issue was really to do with the issue that has been raised tonight, but I don't want to go back on that. I just want to comment on the fact that we were consulted in regards to the development in the catchment area, on not only in the catchment area, on also where these facilities have been installed, mainly the tanks. I'm not too worried about that. One of the conditions we did set at the time was if we will allow the use of the land, provided there is no tariff on the water. That was one of the conditions we did set as landowners. We're happy with that. We also understand there is a cost involved in the operation of these facilities. And the suggestion that a certain amount be free, we're with that. My concern, maybe we could address it now or maybe at a later stage when we go into tariff. But just listening from the discussion last night, if I may continue to talk about this, just going back to the background of the consumption of water per person on the island. My understanding is the consumption rate, if I go back to the 1985 to 90, the consumption rate per person per day was between 600 to 700 liters per day. Can you tell me what is the consumption rate right now? Has that survey been done? Because that will have an impact on what our usage and our storage is going to be. And also it will impact on the rates.
Ko te ui angata George e ui nei, I te mataiti warangoru marima ki te iwangoru, kua rawe ia te tai akarakara ki roto I te mata a te tai tangata o ko tai ka kapopinga I te vai, kua katina mō ia me te tai hono anere ki te itu anere rita I te tangata o ko tai I te rā. Ea ai rira tā koto aka nono anga, me te mea ka kamata ke tātou I te tutaki I tō Tatou Vai no te aka takaanga no te tangata o ko tai.
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. George, I have difficulty accepting those figures for two reasons. The first is because we don't know how much is being consumed, and we will not know until we install meters, and consequently no tariff will be introduced for at least 1.5 years. Also because, as Tapi pointed out, no one's going to pay for muddy water. People aren't going to pay for what they're getting at the moment. But the second reason is that consumption is far above the average in other Pacific countries. Now, I'll refer this to my CEO, Greg, because he's worked for many years in Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea and Kiribati.
Te tāne tutua nei I ko te ia numero tāo e akataka nei ka rerau pa ia I te arikiro I te rera no te akatina mō anga I te akapoa nā rā ka akatau ka kara rātou te akapō anga vai nei tia katoa te tai kāritia e akamata wuwi ki e tutakia ka pō me te tai tai ki te apamata iti e rere akara i ai no te akapōang. Ko te rua i rera, te karangani ai e ko te akapōanga kua maatātu ki aka aiti i atu ki te tai o Basirea i roto nei i tō tātou pae, ko Greg i rera rato tō mai ki tātou tānei ki te iai aane i te au inua ke.
So Greg Longman from TTV, Chief Executive. George, in answering this, I'd just like to share a couple of examples. One is from a developed country and the other one's from Vanuatu.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
I'm fully aware of the fact that our consumption rate during that time was much higher than any of the Pacific countries. Basically for the reason this was taken on an average basis. That's how I got to understand that figure. But the point I'm trying to get at is when we consider the amount of water that we're talking about, maybe it's premature for us to be discussing this if this can be held back till we actually go through this process, because this is a lot of uninvestigated areas that we haven't even, we're only speculating. We're guided by figures and what people are saying. We haven't experienced this. And that's why I'm suggesting maybe we could delay this part, the tariff part, and probably look, although we're planning to set laws, because whatever laws we set here is going to impact on us in the future. And there are a lot of unknowns that we don't even know right now. We're only guesstimating.
Yeah.
I think, George, what the Act says is that there will be a free allocation of water provided to people. It doesn't say how much. And you're quite right. We won't know how much until we're able to measure how much households use, how much hotels use, how much our growers use. And that's a period of time. So that'll take at least 2 years before we even get close to that figure of knowing as much as possible we want to give our people free water. How much is going to be needed for that?
Yeah, I understand that, and yeah, I'm not worried about that. The fact of the matter, I think it's, when we're talking about tariffing and all of that, I think it's a bit premature right now. I've got other thoughts that I want to raise, but I'll raise that later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, George. We have one more here. We seem to have jumped all over the Act now. We haven't moved through the other sections. Before we, Diane, just let Baba Sam, and then we'll have your one.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Sam Lapa. Just to comment, George Ilunga Ta'awe Tutuara, the motorway project, the Meakano Ora motorway project, the Moru water meter, a Tukun area. Cross section, another way to the Turungare commercial or Tiara Chiriburu, Rimoru in total. Rocomet a numero to Kuimara to Key Rocomet a Manocoe, Air Atata way a tang, a madam. Now the time I put in the gear, the Kiki motor, turn away a tang, a Haiti cateta, a tateta in Muduare, Itaku in the Kuyanagre. And I'm not Kimi Kimi Akapra, Kitty of Maydida, that were Tati Papa Kiriway to Tanamang, Tanton Memory, 24/7, Tomaru Marmatais, more around now. So the numero without Tiger, they have that motorway, or TTV, they are the motorway, Sirato Puro, Tilia, no wrong. Metobo Poro, Metato, first you got to run it. You get away at on capacity at the total land. Now, no longer get to Turunga, the Tuanga, Kataka, Kitato, Rokita, and I to at the power. It the power, Romarato with the 220 watts to 240 Hotelia Tarato service delivery. Now, no longer we to that motorway project, the Pranya, the Ebon, Wakano, yeah, the service delivery kone we get area ka haru Tatou Vai, ki raro te standard na papa aia, ki runga iri. I kone, hono ratu taratu akarang. So, bita taigwera me no kone, no runga te ronga, no ora, no runga uki te teitei tu tatu pupaipa, tāna mō karo kai operato vai kiuta, torongoru meters. So, pōura ti apenga ere i kuroko mai tire numero I tamato vai. Na, ning mai tātou ere ki te pupu tātou vai, ti te me karero kai tātou tanga tia me oune no te pupu pātoi. So, all set to run. Well, e taka marama tire. Me angangan tire, kara tātou mea unuwai chocolate ko. Me tanga yan tire, kai nongore to tātou vai te kite, ia tātou vai e tanga ne. Pōre ta I te rumata I tino tiri rā, pāpue ki runga tāu tumana koe tuku maero koe George.
Just one other final point, what George was saying, that one of the objectives of tariffs when they are introduced in a couple of years is to stop people wasting water. But many people have said, well, what's the point of telling us not to waste water when you're losing 40% in the pipes? So really the first step is to make sure the pipe workers, we stop losing water in the pipes. Only after that, it doesn't make sense to go to the consumers.
Thank you. Yeah, Diane.
Kia orana committee, kia orana everyone. In regards, just following on from the previous speakers about free allocation, I just want to draw our attention to section 31, subsection 1, where it says that it talks about the free allocation that will be given to domestic users as such, and the amount will be specified in regulations to come. The part that I'm moving to is number 2 in the same section 31, number 2. It reads also the sums that would have been payable to the authority for the supply of the water without charge under subsection 1 of section 31 is a debt due to the authority by the Crown, and under subsection 2B, payable to the authority on the date that the charge would have been payable by customers, but for the requirement in subsection 1 to supply free water. Does this mean that the allocation of free water in 31 subsection 1 will then be paid by taxpayers in subsection 2?
Yeah.
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai, that is correct, and the reason for that is a precaution. Tatou Vai has the obligation not to make a profit, but to be self-funding. If the government gives a free allocation that is so high that we can't be self-funding, we breach our own act. So, and in any event, any subsidy should be transparent. When taxpayers' money is being used to underwrite a company, even if it's government-owned, the public's got a right to know how much that's worth, to decide whether it's a good spend. So the answer is yes, but Ian Hayes, a consultant, has done a preliminary tariff report, and that's on rough figures because we don't know how much water has been lost in the system and so on. But at this stage, it looks as if the government will be able to require us to give the free allocation, and we will not have to charge the government for it, and I hope that remains the case.
If I can also give an example, what that means is the government has to demonstrate what it considers community service obligations. So if we look at a company like Te Aponga, the street lights that it provides, there's a cost involved in doing the street lights. And in the budget book, that cost is borne by the government. It's called a community service obligation. Excuse me. In the Ports Authority, they provide it for the mooring of domestic boats, domestic shipping. There's a value to that that's lost to the ports. So it's the value that's lost. It must be demonstrated in the books. This would be something similar. You'll notice in the new water mains there is fire hydrants right around the island. When a fire engine uses that water, it's not going to be charged for that water. It's part of, again, the community service obligation that we provide. That would be similar then to this allocation of free water for domestic households.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, for the record, I'm Diana Asen from Poikura. I'm representing landowners that are on the lands leading up to Ngātui. Sorry, if I forgot to say that. Okay, so it all depends on the on the specific amount that is set, right? That will be set by Tatou Vai for the domestic use, domestic users of that will get the free allocation, and then of course is there a trial period, for this before they exercise? Tatou Vai wants to exercise subsection 2 of section 31.
Yes, absolutely. I think there will need to be a trial period to firstly work out what is the water consumption. And that would need to take place over a period of more than a year to get accurate figures.
Okay. It's just needed clarity because, of course, the promotion has been free allocation, but then there's this little sub-clause that says that in a roundabout way, the taxpayer will actually pay for it in the end. So I just needed some clarity about that. Will this clause in the bill be more clarified to mention what you have just specifically said? The true intention of the government and also of Tatou Vai in regards to this section.
Sorry, will it be what?
Well, I think
will it be more specified as to what you've just said, that there will be a testing and then there will be a grace period so that this testing can be done, and then thereafter, once the allocation has been decided and confirmed, then that's when subsection 2 will take effect.
Brian Mason, Chair to Tatou Vai. I wouldn't myself put a procedural matter like that in the Act. The key thing is this, that we can't really determine the free allocation until the meters are installed and we work out how much domestic consumers use. At the Sinai Hall, concern was expressed last night that if you have a family of 5, you've got to measure your allocation to the maximum size of the household, the possible maximum size of the household. Otherwise, people may end up with an allocation that's too little for them to manage. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you.
Excuse me, mega tika kia neke Brian I dana presentation no de mega ta ko hui anga ere tirungai dia section kare tatu ia kari riki. So if we can just a little patience, and Brian will move through the next sections that we've already spoken quite a bit about.
Yeah, thank you, Brian Mason, Chair to Tatou Vai. This is the same as last night, that people seem to be well ahead of the presentation. They've read the bill, which is very good. So I'll talk more perhaps about the principles that behind the tariffs.
Te akarani au kua viviki tātou I te rere ki mua I te akanonoanga o tā tātou uipa. Nā rā I roto I te atianga ka ina ro I te tōtu atu reira no runga I te tai o manako o te tutaki anga o tō tātou wai.
The first thing is that I am aware that there are a few people who say that we are never short of water.
E ronga neo te tai o tangata I te tūtuanga e kāre roa tātou I ngereana I te wai.
That is simply not correct. During periods of drought, those particularly in Rutaki will have experienced very low pressure. Some of our streams are almost completely dry.
And
that must damage aquatic life. And that must have a negative effect on taro patches. One of the aims of a tariff when introduced
Ko te tai tumu I reira, ka anonu e kia tutaki e te tai muni aka pouanga,
is to cause people not to waste water.
e aka maruru I te tangata e auraka kia kai mou I te vai.
In other words, when people use water, they think before they use it.
E me koti o ki reira tō tātou tū no runga I tā tātou aka puapinga anga I te vai e no tātou o rai te.
However, it is accepted by everyone that if people are going to pay for water, it's got to be a lot better than it is now.
E kua ariki o tātou I reira, me te mea ka tutaki tātou I te tai muni no runga I tō tātou vai, ka me taki atu te tūranga o te vai.
Although Tatou Vai cannot make a profit,
E nātou kia kua ka tina mou ia, auraka roa tō tātou vai e kia kimi puapinga mātātu.
that does not mean it will not waste money.
E kare te reira e ka tūtō mai au, ka rai rātou e kai mō moitumuni.
It is government's intention before any tariff is introduced
O te mānakonoko o te kawamani e muake ka aka tina mou ia e te tai au aka tutaki anga muni, aka pō anga muni.
that any tariff we set will be subject to the review or determination
E I roto I te tai au akairi anga tero, tutaki anga nā tātou, ka ere ki roto I te tai putuputu anga nā rātou e ākarakara norunga I te reira.
of the recently established Competition and Regulatory Authority.
E ka riro e nā tia kopapa o te anga uia mai te tai ngā e patoma makore ngā maramake nei, no runga I te ākarakara anga, I te tū o te tiati anga, e te tarere anga, I roto I te kimikimi anga.
And that's to ensure that we're not only self-funding,
E ko te tai manako ki te rere auraka kia nā tātou warai e kimi tō tātou puaping,
and that we don't make a profit,
e auraka tātou kia puapinga ia,
but also that we are not extravagant and we are careful with our expenditure.
e auraka tātou kia kai tua ua ia, me ware kai momo ua I te rera I oronga ia mai ki tātou.
The bill provides, next slide, that we can charge different rates
Kua ka kite mai nei te ture tāmana koe, ka rauka I te kopapa nei I te tuku mai I te tai tutaki anga muni I roto I te akataka anga tūkeke.
depending on the type of use
Nō runga oki I te tū o te akapou anga o te vai.
and depending on how much is used.
E te ruara e a te maata o ta au ka akapou.
As George had mentioned, I think it was George, that there should be a different rate for domestic, agriculture and commercial.
E me tā George rai e taiku mai rai kia tūkeke rai te tiati anga muni, tutaki anga muni no te akapou anga o te pai o te tanu, te pai o te ngutuare e pera katoa te pai o te kimi pōping.
Tatou Vai can charge a connection fee to connect you to the water supply,
Ka rauka I te tō tātou vai I te tuku atu te tai tiati anga no te tōpiri anga I a koutou ki runga I te vai.
and this is similar to what ICI has been doing for many years.
E ko te tā te ICI rave, e rai tiri rave nei te umata I te topa.
We've already discussed the free allocation of water.
O tutu an tātou nurunga I te tai akapou anga vai e kare koe tutak.
But I would point out one section which is related to connection, which Greg will speak on,
Kai nā rera I te tutu atu ki tātou rera nurunga I te tai tuanga o te ture nurunga I te topiri atuanga ki runga.
which is section 29.5.
Te runga te rera I te irawa rongo urumaiva rima.
Allowing the authority to charge customers a flat periodic charge.
E te tiati anga I a tātou ki roto I te tai akatakataka.
That runs counter to the government's decision of a free allocation.
E kua ka tina mau I te rera ki runga I te tā te kaumani I toto mai e ka oronga mai I te tai vai akapou ana tātou ka re tutaki. Nā mo.
And you may assume, I believe, that the Select Committee will recommend to Parliament that that clause be deleted.
E ko te tai mana koe rera te tukuna ia mai, e ke tuku atu te select committee ki te paramani e ke tipu ia te.
Yeah, to Greg. And you can speak to the...
This one where it says must.
Oh, yes. Do you want me to? Yeah. Related to that
E tārua atu katoa I te rera.
is another
29.2.
section, 29.2,
I rawarua o mai warua.
which requires every household to be connected to the Tatou Vai network.
Te maroanga e kia topiri ia te ungutu are katotoa ki runga I te vai.
Some members of the select committee and the public, some members of the select committee and the public
Te tai o mema o te kumiti e prākatoa te katotoa.
have objected to this, saying that if a household wants to create its own water supply,
O pātu I rātou e mei te mea ka rauka I te tai ngutu are I te angarai I tōna vai.
it should not have to be connected.
E mea tau rai rere auroka kia atu I atu ki runga I te vai.
So that section is likely to change from at least one owner of a building must
E kua kakatu ke ia te rera ke tau ki te ture ka anonu I o tai tangata ki atu I ki runga I te vai.
to any one owner of a building may.
Me kore te tai ua atu tangata I roto I te rera ngutu are ka pene ka pati ai I te rera. Kari te maro I.
And now I'll ask Greg just to speak a little bit more about connection before we pause.
Toto atu Greg ke tātou norunga I te o atu I anga ki runga I to Tatou Vai, moa ke tātou ka ere I te ui anga.
Greg Longman from TTV oversee on section 27, it infers that if a customer does not pay, then the water supply...
Tātou I tēnei ki te irawaruanga o rumaitu, me te mea kāre te tai tangata,
Yeah, the water supply may be limited, but not cut off completely.
Kare tutaki I tāna akapoanga muni no runga I te vai, te karangane rere ka akaiti I mai tōna vai, kare topiri I.
And the reason that it will not be cut off is because water is essential for life.
Ko te tumu kare e topiri I te vai, e apinga popinga te ia no to tātou rang.
It may be limited, and unlike electricity, which we can have cut off,
Pene ia ka kahiti ia mai te rera, mea ka ai te atu tātou rera ki te uira power, me kare koe tutaki tipu ia te rera.
the human race has lived for many, many centuries without electricity. Our forefathers, but we have not lived without water.
Ko te au tangata I topa I roto I te uki ere mai, I ora ana rātou, kare o rātou uira, ori uira, nara, kare rātou e ora mi te mea kare vai.
On the same subject, so TTV may suspend the water supply if a consumer. One of the issues here is if someone compromises the water supply.
Ko tō tātou vai, karau kai rātou I te kiritike I tō o vai ki tō o ngutu are, me te mea kai momo I te vai. Aka kino I te tūranga popinga me taki o te vai.
One of our goals is to supply clean, safe water.
Ko te tai tapa o ia mātou te tō tātou vai, kia oronga atu ki roto I te o ngutu are I te vai me taki e te mā.
And if the network system is compromised, damaged, yep.
Me te mea ka taki kino ia te o paipa vai.
There may be a potential for contamination from other external sources in that environment. An example may be that if a pipe is underneath a pig farm or something like that, contaminated water may get in through a damaged pipe, which is not what...
Ko te
which,
tai au rāwanga I rera karauka I tō tātou vai I te akaiti mai makore I te tipu I te vai, me te mea e au paipa te tai kua kino atu, me te tū, me te mea ko te paipa e kua nganga āti raro ke eia I te tai au puaka, e ko te repo o te puaka ka aere ki roto I te paipa vai, ka riro te rere I te aka tuke, e te aka kino I te tūranga o te vai.
And another aspect is the pipes are linear, they run along, and if one consumer at the start of the pipe, the run, removes nearly all the water, the far end may not get a supply of good pressure and quantity of water.
O te tai rāwanga e tipu ia e tō o vai, me te mea ko tāmo ia tātou ki runga I te tai paipa vai o tai, e ko te aronga o runga I te vai, e te akapopinga nei rātou, e te kaimomo nei rātou I te vai, e ko riro e tāmana man tātou I te aronga o raro I te rera paipa vai.
So as a consequence, there is provision for TTV to investigate if someone's removing much water which disadvantages other people and puts them in an unfair or unjust situation.
Ka rawe ka ere mātou ka ākarakara e atia manamanta I tupu mai e nā mātou reira e paunu reira me ka kiriti ke e ka ape atu mātou I te reira tuaronga no te kaimomo anga I te wai.
Following any discussions with incidences as such, Tatou Vai, I'll start again. Tatou Vai may terminate on a 24-hour notice if the consumer in a situation is wasting significant amounts of water or draining at a disadvantage to others.
E me te mea reira ka kaimomo koto I te vai ke tau ki te iau akamarama anga te tutu I atu na kone ka oronga atu, pene ka oronga atu tō tātou vai me te tai rā ki koto no te ia kaimomo anga vai tā koto e rawe nei.
Yep. Okay, so the next one is the authority may restrict flow to agriculture if other users are taking a priority. And that was really a similar explanation to the previous example.
E ko te tai tumu e rau kai I tō tātou vai I te kaiti mai I tō tātou vai me te mea e aronga tantan te tai e aka pōpinga nei e te aka maata nei rātou I te aka pōanga norunga I tā rātou mea tantan.
And the next three items are in the same subject.
Go ahead. Okay.
Is it you?
I think do we pause there, I think.
Should we take a pause?
Yeah, just before we take a pause, Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai, at the Sinai Hall last night, some farmers took exception to the reference to agriculture.
E na pō ko tūtō te tai aronga norunga I te aka pōanga I te vai no te tantan.
Because it made agriculture look like the least priority.
Me te mea tura rai rera e ko te tai mea hichi te e kari te pōping.
I thought about this overnight because hotels were mentioned, but it is important that guests have water.
E waka mana kua nāo te I na pō, e mea pōping atoa e, o te au tangata e no nei ki roto I te au o te ara, ka no I rai rātou te tai vai.
But then I thought, is it more important for the hotel to fill its swimming pool or for the farmer to be able to water their
Haka mana koe rero
plants?
ki re rao re ko te iau o te ara nei, e o swimming pool tō rātou, me mea tau rai re ke eru o tātou no kia oronga tātou no rātou I ki mpōpinga nei, haka pere te aronga tantan.
Consequently, I will ask the Select Committee if they would agree to my amending the bill.
E kai nao re rao re I te pati, I te tuku te tai tāmana koanga ki te Select Committee, e no te tai aka tuki anga ki runga I te.
So it doesn't look as if agriculture is at the bottom.
Kia akari mai re re, kare te tuanga tantanu e te raro I te aka no anga pōpinga.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Te tuera ko nei tātou. O te tai Tātou te kai naore tuku mai te manako. Thank you, George. E tiri o awaiki, e tiri aru mai.
Just two questions. First one is when we're talking about the supply of water. Apparently, Rarotonga is not a flat land that everybody gets water at the same time. It's like this. The ones on the bottom will always get water. The ones on the top won't get water. We know that. And those above the elevation of the intake will not get water. What happens during this time that sometimes after so many periods you run low on water, especially the houses on the top? Will there be a separate area that they can access water to supply them? Because I'm not sure whether this bill will guarantee that everybody gets water within this area we're talking about. That's the first question I'd like to ask. Because I think right now there are some people that are buying their water. After 2 weeks without rain, those on the higher elevation will not get water. Those on the low will get it. That's why I want to ask that, because we got to remember everywhere will be metered. We'll end up with places that we will need to get some water to service.
That's the second.
Is Tatou Vai going to have a big reservoir that people can buy off them?
Is that your second question as well?
The second question is, I don't see it in the Act whether you have provisions for drought. That's the second question I'd like to raise.
Thank you. I'll get the board to respond.
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. There are two related aspects. The TTV does have the power to restrict water at the time of drought, and it has adopted the same program that ICI has used for many years in that regard. But of course the second question, and the difficult one, is about, well, what is Tatou Vai, what is its contingency plan in the event of drought? That's a very difficult question, and for that reason I'll hand it over to my CEO.
So it's Greg Longman from TTV CE. Two points, George. Just recently, an example, although we have an abundance of water, and today, 3 weeks ago, we sat on a committee within TTV called our Drought Committee. It was members of the audience who work for TTV who were on there, and some members on this panel as well, here as well, or on that. We informed the ministries, and we informed, in particular, ICI and agriculture. And some of the provisions which were set out by ICI were discussed at length, and some of them were to look at reducing the water consumption with discussions from agriculture to see if people were using 24 hours sprinklers. That wasn't TTV, that was agriculture, but it was done as a discussion with them. So the provisions for drought, the actual intakes do drop, and as Papa Sam, his demonstration of that, the photograph, that in drought the levels do go down. The places where the water is held in Rarotonga aren't in big reservoirs and dams, as in many countries such as New Zealand and Australia. A lot of it is in the underground water table, and so trying to ensure that that is pristine, and that is a very strong part of the catchment above the intake, and the catchment committee's goal is to assist in making sure that the water table, the underground water table, is held. In times Papa Sam's told me that many times in his life, he has been through times where water has been very limited. And the...
Can I just interrupt you? I think we're only hearing hearsay here. I'm just only looking at what the bill is talking about, because I think there are provisions here that are missing out, which needs to be put in the bill. I'm asking this question because this bill doesn't show any of this. That's why I'm raising that issue. Especially right now with the situation that we're going in. It's raining now. After a week, I don't get water up to my house. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm not sure what the plan is, whether there is guarantee that water will get up to these houses, although they're well below 30 meters. I'm not even 30 meters where my house is located. I'm just above 10 meters. But after a week or 2 weeks, I run out of water. There's no pressure there.
Thank you, George. I think in your case, we're talking about a current system now. When the new system is in place, as we saw, it will reach up to 30 meters. If your house is below that, your water pressure, the water pressure that the new system will have, should be able to push the water into your system.
Also, George, I think the Brian Mason chair to Tatou Vai, this issue was raised at the Sinai Hall last night, and the reality is that the options aren't extensive. First of all, you've got to stop the leaky pipes, because that's 40% of your loss. The second thing is that 8 of the 10 valleys now have storage tanks, but even though those storage tanks look impressive, they will only last for 2 days. Some of you will remember that during Dr. Tom Davis's time, a very large reservoir was built. Where is it? O-ring? At the back. Yeah. And that now can no longer be used. But what Tatou Vai is looking at is getting some very large tanks and actually putting them in that reservoir. And that should substantially increase the storage capacity. But it's a practical thing. Salination is another possibility from seawater, but that's very expensive, uses a lot of electricity, and it's quite hard for it to function. Greg's had experience of that in Vanuatu. So the problem that you've raised is not so much a legislative one, it's a practical one. It's a really hard, it's very difficult to get storage capacity for Rarotonga, just on practical front, and expensive.
Yeah, I understand. The only thing I'm just saying is, if we don't get water, are there areas that we can access to get water? That's what I'm asking. Because once the meter is on, it's somebody that's going to pay for it.
Yeah, thank you, George.
Papa Tapi. Sorry, Aweki, and then Papa Tapi.
Kerana, ko Aweki aperau, atu inu au ki runga I te pupai paki utai avatiu, e pera katoa ki runga I te pupai pai matawera. Akaramai tato I tātātou papature tamanoko, ko io ke numero ono ruma ono tureiti. Tuanga si te karanga nei kone te paruru me kore anga I te tai au ture no runga I te aka tinamau e te aka puapinga I te tai au rua vai vai puna ke vai ti aka ia I te tai, vai I raro I te papa inua, vai iua, vai tanka, me kore kauwai. Ko te manako I kone e te Select Committee, E pati anga te ia. Te re rato ko pati anga nei ko nei. Kia kiriti ia te e tuanga ki mo. No te mea. E tuanga te maa te ia. Ki te tangata te ngutu are e pera katoa. Ki te ronga tanu. Tapiri katoa atu ki konei.
Awan Papa, I would like to refer to Regulation 66C. It reads to prohibit and create rules about installation and use of any well, artesian water supply, desalination plant, underground water table, a rainwater, water tank, river or stream. It is my plea before the Select Committee that this part of this regulation be removed, be deleted.
Te rera te tumu anga mi tāko i aka kite, e te maa te e tuanga ki runga e te au ngutuare.
I am claiming that it is a big burden to the household,
Pera katoa ki te ronga tanu,
including the planters, people that plant.
e te tānganga anga i tā rātou rawenga ua orai i te kiriti mai, i te koikoi mai ti a wai, ki a rauka i rātou i te tānganga no tō rātou akorong.
And for them to get water so they can use for their purposes.
Kau ki a kau rira te manako ki a koto e te committee, challenge committee, i tika i toko tō ngāti te.
So I would like to plea and to ask the Select Committee
Kia kiriti ti a toanga
to remove this part
ti a
of
toanga
this bill.
Tātou e karongani. O te me mōtara, ai rongo te akarongo e ato koto manako ki runga i tia.
I want to hear what's your answer.
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. No one in the public has liked 66A, B or C. No one. No one in the public likes 66A, B or C.
Ko te o tangata kātou tō, kare rātou e Amerikana I te irawono urmaono A, B, C.
We have discussed A and B, which will be amended to give landowners comfort.
Ko ariki mātou e kia katuke ia te A, B, kia mama mai ki runga I te o ngutuare.
Tatou Vai needs to be able to create, Tatou Vai needs to be able to ask the government to create rules regarding wells, underground water supply, because it needs to make sure people don't damage the quality of the water. But that shouldn't apply to rainwater. And there should be no prohibition on water tanks. So that clause will need to be changed to give farmers the comfort that the purpose of the clause is not to stop them using water, but to make sure no one spoils the water. And no one takes so much water other people miss out. To put it briefly, we agree with you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Mata. No te na marmaramanga I te tuanga e taka ua ni toko roro I te akarongotu.
Thank you, Brian, for that clear explanation, because my head is spinning listening to you.
Ari o te ka te te rua. Ara mai tato ki raro I te numero ono o ma waru.
Secondly, we go to section 68.
Tuku atu me tō tātou vai ki te kopapa aka aere.
The transfer from Tatou Vai Limited to the authority.
Mai tātou ki raro I te numero I. Te karanga nei, ko tō tātou vai a tōpiri ia te reira I raro ake I te tuanga I wangoru mā rua o te Ture Companies Act 1970-71. Kia tika ito ko tō ngā te tai aka maramara mangai kone, tenga mata.
I'm referring to E. Tatou Vai Limited is deemed to be dissolved under Section 92 of the Companies Act 1970-71.
Explain.
Please explain.
The dissolution of the company.
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. Currently, we are just a company owned by the government.
Te taime e kamupani mātou I raro ke I te kauman.
But most government organisations, like Te Pongawira, Ports Authority, Airport Authority in Bangkok Islands,
Ko te mātanga o te au kopapa, aka tina mō I raro ki te ture, me te aponga uira, te Airport Authority e prato to Tatou Vai.
are established under an Act of Parliament
Ko aka tina mō I rato, I raro ki te ture, aka mana I te Parliament.
which requires them to be accountable to the public
E anono I rato, e ki akari mai I tā rato aka popinga ki te katotoa,
and to the government
e prato I te kauman.
by producing accounts,
Naruto I te akari e te maanga I tā rato aka poa.
by having their expenditure reviewed,
E ki akarakara matati o katoa e ki roto I tā rato aka poa.
by producing a business plan
Te akari maanga I tā rato anga popinga, pitini.
to ensure that they spend public monies wisely.
E kia anono I rato e ki aka pou metaki I te aka pou anga muni te oronga ia mai.
That section says you are no longer a private company,
E ko te rira I rawa ture nei, wa ki te mai rira, kāre koutou e rira o me te au company business rai.
you are now a statutory corporation,
E kōpapara koutou I aka tina mō I raro ake I te ture.
just like Te Aponga and so on.
Me te au kōpapara e tāku I tae kua tūne no kone te aponga uwere te wea ture.
Thank you, no te maramanga.
Thank you for your explanation.
Karana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Papa. Ko Papa Tapi, e tiri aru mai ko te mama e kone, e tiri ko te turu.
Okay,
Sorry, my dear.
It won't take long. I'm just looking at the talk about the water that we are. It's so much going to be so complicated. Me akara tatu, if we look at the water, I think to sort out this problem is what we are talking and punishing all the people. Minister, looks like you got to go and borrow some more money. We need a lot of meters. You put on each household. Everyone got a meter. When you look at the meter, you're giving them an amount of water they use a week or a month. And if the water at the home exceeds double, which means there's a leak, there's a broken pipe between the meter to your home. No one knows that, but that meter will tell, and it will save you all the water and will reach the man who said he didn't get the water. If you don't get the water, I think you should have a right to get a refund. Talk to Brian. Let's look simple. Get the meter for every home. It's not this to punish you, but this is to take care of you, that meter. The government will give you the amount of water that you use for free. And also, accounts for the people that using too much water in their hotel, the swimming pool, he was saying, and the farmers, which they will have, I'm sure, a special price. You will look at that. That meter is important. That's all. Then you're not going to use 66, you're going to find somebody $5,000. My God, poor people, we haven't got any money, I haven't got any. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Papa Tapi, for your information. Watch the takere de muni ti akataka ia I te tamo moanga te o mita na te katoto. Are te o ngutua re tuta ki tara tu mita. Watch te chiraroa ki te pachiro te TTV. Thank you. Atutu mai koe mama. Amu mai ti mama. Sorry, this one here first and then aru mai ko koe rira.
Kia ora ana. My name is Justine Matatoa Flanagan. I'm from Ngātangia, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and some of the people that have approached me about some of the issues with the bill. It seems that a lot of good work was done yesterday, last night, and I think all those that stood up and spoke, some of the big issues I have with the bill have already been resolved thanks to the open ears and open minds of our officials up the front. So I had major issues with the dreaded regulations, section 66, and in particular 29, customer participation compulsory. It seems that particular section 29 is going to have a lot of work done to it. It seems that there's going to be quite a few sections that will be altered. I think that the public deserve to, because of a lot of this bill is either about land rights or water charges. That's the bulk of the bill. And all of this will be rewritten, and obviously when you change one clause, it impacts another one. Maybe the public need another opportunity to look at the revised bill and be able to just make sure that they are satisfied with it. Because as we can see, language is very slippery, and one little word like must or may is very important. So that's what I would ask for people to consider up the front. Okay. So just at a practical level, could you please explain what restriction of water means?
Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. Now, that's an issue that was raised in the Sinai Hall last night. They said, well, you've got the right to restrict and you can't stop the supply of water, and the idea behind that is that it's essential for life. But the problem is that you decide what that is, and you might decide it's just a litre of water. So I think that's a fair comment, that there should be, the restriction should be more specific to ensure that Tatou Vai can't just willy-nilly restrict the water so much that really it becomes meaningless. So I agree with you on that point.
So what are the next steps for looking at that issue?
Well, I'm not sure at the moment, because I defer to my CEO as to the quantity of water that you, below which you can reasonably say that's going to make life very difficult or difficult for people. What that quantity should be, I would defer to people with better knowledge than I have.
I see. So is the connection that goes to a house, is it kind of like the internet where you can just choke it and have it down to water dial-up?
I wish you hadn't asked that question, because it may in fact be quite difficult to restrict people's supply. It's not easy. So for those who don't pay their bills at this stage, they'll be pleased to know that it may be difficult for us to do anything.
Okay, thank you for answering that. So I just want to, because we've got this section 29 customer participation compulsory, and we're going to be changing it, and I've had some people approach me and say, well, I'm just going to go off the grid. So to me, that means that if they don't want to, they don't have to have the connection running to their house, that they won't be charged any money, including a monthly bill for connection, because they're getting the water off their roof. Is that the case?
That is correct.
Okay, great. So that's a bit of a tension then for the board, isn't it? Because you've just said the purpose of the tariffs is to, first of all, discourage waste of water, which we haven't defined yet. And maybe if we have lots and lots of water, like Dr. Taina Rongo indicated last night, we might be in for 30 years of lots and lots of water. We might not actually ever run out of water, maybe. So there's that issue, the restriction of water. But then the other reason to have tariffs is to ensure that the authority can continue to operate because it has running costs. So I'm just wondering how you're going to play out that tension between allowing people to go off the grid and then the rest of us have to connect and you still have to operate.
Well, I think that's similar to Teaponga has the issue at the moment that it encouraged everyone to put into solar power, and all of a sudden it realises that it has a cash flow problem because all the big users of power have gone to solar and the poorer people who can't afford it are still on electricity. So I think it's a difficult issue to manage, but it is a choice between giving people freedom of choice or forcing people to be on the grid to ensure you're financially viable. Unless I'm mistaken, I think the Select Committee has taken the view that we should not interfere with people's ability to be off the grid if they wish to be.
Yes, that's correct. If I can also add to that, the purpose of this bill is to supply water, clean water, to everybody at the best possible price that the government can produce it at. It's not to restrict water. The provisions there to restrict water are to do with households who exceed their allocation and refuse to pay their bill. If there are cases of genuine hardship, then there is provision for that under other government departments to help people, like we do households who can't afford to pay their power bill. There is support mechanisms here to help people do that. But it's to enable people to be able to have access easily to clean water. If somebody wants to spend their money on their own water systems, to have their own water off the grid, then they're welcome to do that as well. They don't have to connect to the government's water. They can choose to connect on their own water.
Okay. So one last question about the different types of users that we have for water. So there were 3 users that were put up there. I guess they're just a general indication. We've got commercial, agriculture and domestic. Within specifically the commercial one, there's many different types of commercial user of water, so I assume maybe resorts might fall under that?
Yeah. Brian Mason, Chair, Tatou Vai. Yeah, Justine, that also was a very valid issue raised in the Sinai Hall, that in other places it's very easy to distinguish commercial, domestic and agriculture, but the reality of Rarotonga is many people still have small farms on their residential properties and they have small stalls at the market or elsewhere. You have many B&B places, so it may well be that a tourist operator who's got 5 units together says, why am I being charged the commercial rate? Because somebody else has got 5 different houses around the island and they're renting them to tourists. So working out the differential rates is going to be quite a complex exercise if we're going to try and be fair to everyone.
And so what is the process for doing that?
Well, there isn't any at the moment because simply because we haven't had time to look at it, and also because we know that they can't be, that tariffs practically will not be able to be introduced, as the Chairman said, for at least a couple of years. So, so there will be a process, but we haven't worked out that yet. But as I mentioned, I think previously, that the current objective is that the Competition and Regulatory Authority would probably be the people who would undertake that, and no doubt they would have a process that they feel should be followed. Now, obviously, a bill leading to the extent to which the public would have an input, that will depend on what the legislation says when it's passed, because the Competition and Regulatory Authority Act will be amended to include us. And that requires a more substantial amendment, because the way it's worded at the moment, it's very specifically telecom. And so I can't really comment on what that process would be at this stage.
Okay, thank you. So it seems that there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out that will impact us seriously. So I will ask you now to, when you are looking at those things, no matter how it's done, that the public do get an opportunity to participate in this decision-making process, because it impacts everyone. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Papa.
Ako irorangi to kingo no prakrak mayo. Te tuto nei tatou no ngata thank you at minute. Rawo toreo kare ale me kare tuta ki te wai thank you. Te pingo ki te tama er mai matu ki te iri kapu te po ta korong we me ka tuta ki le te wai. Te raga te ki te mane ko e kare tuta ki te wai. Te were te tenga. No te me ki mara mama ko ako tuia no te reservoir i te kone. Reservoir 1988 dena. Tugu te kono Tom Davis Prime Minister te ratuato. Tera. Kakatui ton te otongo ki ni kone karai tupuan. E ka mai, e turu reservoir. Anganga te kone karau ki te akore anganga ko e muri mai. Wai maa tera. Tera wai supply arung katoto. Tera ko te reservoir. Nara kalu kutu taru na te mana ko te reservoir. Iri te pa cross ya pa turi apa to moto wai. No te mea, haru ki nata moto wai ka iri te mei te ratuato. I tira te ki te ne tira, ta rara to matu wai report. Ko toi mo ko na ro ki te me te atu tu te ke wana te wai. Na to ko tu ne ko toi ti tangata.
Amendments will be act. So, a regulatory authority way would be to change the opening words from at least one owner of the building, seen pointed out.
In Vanuatu, recently, I believe the legislation's changed.
Out is quite correct to actually then decide on the appropriate financial penalty or sentence as it is justified by the offence.
The definition of water for the purposes of the exemption from negligence?
No, I mean just in the bill in general. Somebody took a glass of water from a bore and got sick, or from a well, we might sue TTV. Then we suggested maybe we should specify that water as supplied by TTV. Maybe we could apply the same specification through.
TTVs are supplying water. They relate to inflation, and we can't just make it limited to water supplied by Tatou Vai, because we also need to manage water generally.
Are you referring to section 66 where it talks about the water from streams, wells, artesian wells?
Oh, yeah, but that's a bit different. That's not. That's about prohibiting.
And there is an excuse that I discover from this bill is for us to catch those who are wasting water. But I do not believe that we are all wasting water.
So eager to reach and arrive at Sundays. To reach them.
And I am about three. And I am about three. And I'm looking at this bill. It is giving the opportunity for government to charge those big businesses. Bill, we need to know what is the free allocation that can be given to each household. I have a question.
Who is the owner of the meter? Or does anything that comes inside there that size will break it, completely destroy it, including your meter?
The meter won't.
So if
Yes, you would, because the meter will be on...
Can't hear you.
Yes, you would, because the meter is on public land, not your private land.
Which you didn't clean.
Well, yeah, I've got a... So they might clean around your meter, they don't clean around mine.
Well, that's what needs to go on the bill. Now everything is clear.